So now once we actually have all of these statistics displayed on our web page, the next thing is to go ahead and calculate the total number of carbohydrates, proteins, fats, and calories consumed by a user in a specific day. So currently we have all of these values here, but we now need to somehow go ahead and add them up. And there are actually multiple ways to add these values. One way is that you can actually go through each of the database item or the Django objects and get these individual values here, and you can straight away go ahead and calculate its total. However, there is another way, and that's much easier way to calculate the total of these values, and that's by using some JavaScript. So what we can do here is that as all of these values are actually rendered on a web page, which is the HTML page, we can make use of some JavaScript to kind of go ahead, get access to the document object model and get individual items or individual values from here, and we can add them up and calculate the total number of macros. So now let's go ahead and learn how exactly can we do that. So as of now, all the values which we have here are actually present in this table, and if you might recall, we have actually assigned an ID to this specific table. So if you actually have a look at the table here, we have the table ID for this specific table. So now, making use of this same ID, we can get access to the document object model, and we can get access to the table using the document object model. So let's go ahead and learn how to do that. So as we are doing this in JavaScript, what we will do is that we will go right where our body tag ends, which is at this particular line, and in here we will go ahead and create a script tag which is actually going to contain our JavaScript. So I will have the script opening and the closing tag, and let's start writing the JavaScript code. So our first job is to go ahead and get access to this table using its ID. So in order to do that, I will create a variable called as table. I will say this equals document dot get element by ID, and we actually want an element whose ID is table. So I will pass in table up over here. Okay, so now once you have these table, now you need to get the values of these following items. So you actually have a row over here, and then you have these individual columns in here for the carbohydrates, proteins, fats, and calories. So now what we wish to do is that we wish to loop through all of these values one by one, and we wish to add them up. And henceforth, in order to go ahead and add them up, let's go ahead and create some variables. So I will say var, let's say carbs equals 0. So let's first initialize all of them to 0. Protein equals 0. Fats equals 0. And calories equals 0. So now once we have these variables, now let's learn how to go ahead and get access to these individual values. So as these values, so if you take a look at this value here, you actually need to go ahead and loop through the rows which are actually present inside this table. So this thing right here is one row, this thing right here is the second row, this thing is the third row, so on and so forth. So in order to loop through all of those rows, let's create a for loop here. So I will say for. So remember that this is a JavaScript syntax and not the Python or Django or the Jinja 2 syntax. So we'll create a variable. So let's start the count from I equals 1, and that's because if you talk about the 0th row, the 0th row is nothing but this header row right here, and we are not actually interested in that. So now let's start with 1, and now if you actually go ahead and initialize the value to 1, the count will start from that value. And now we want to loop unless and until we actually end the number of rows which are present in the table. So I will say while I is less than, and now in order to get the total number of rows inside our table, I would do table, which will actually give me access to this table right here. So I will say table dot rows. So this will actually give me access to the table rows, and now in order to calculate its length, I will do dot length. So this will actually give me the length of this table. However, we want to go ahead and stop at 1 less than that because we are excluding this particular row right there. So I will say this -1 and I++. So once we have this loop, now let's try to go ahead and actually print out the table rows, and let's see what do we get. So when I do console.log, and now let's actually print out the entire row over here. So I will say table dot, let's say, rows, and let's actually pass in the index value for row as I. So this will print out every row which is present inside the table. So now in order to get access to these rows, I will go ahead and I will open up the developer tools. So now if you're on Chrome, you can simply right click and click on inspect element. And when you go ahead and do that, you can actually go to the console, which is the JavaScript console. So now if I go in the console and hit refresh, as you can see, these are the different rows which I get. So I get 1, 2, 3, and 4 rows which are present up over here. However, if you actually take a look at the number of rows which we have here, we actually have 5 rows. However, as we have done -1, it will only display 4 rows. And the reason why we actually have only 4 rows here, because we are now going to go ahead and add another row over here at the bottom, which is actually going to be the row to display the total. So that's why we have kept this thing at -1. However, if you go ahead and change it to this, and if you hit refresh, as you can see, you will get the 5 rows over here. So you can actually see that we also have the values in here as well. So now our job is to go ahead and get the values from these. So now getting the values is actually quite simple. So once you are into this row, so if you actually take a look at this, these are nothing but the rows, and the columns are actually called as cells. So if you want to go ahead and access some cell values, you can go ahead and do that as well. So you can do dot cell, and in here you can pass in some index value. So let's say I want to access the index value of the cell 1. I can go ahead do that, and now if I hit refresh, I get an error. That's because there should be cells. So if I go ahead and refresh again, as you can see, now we got the values inside cell 1, which is the column for carbs. So this thing right here is cell number 0, and this thing right here for the carbs is cell number 1. So as you can see, we have all the carb values in here. So now once you have the carb values, you can now go ahead and actually save those values. But if you notice over here, you also have this td tag as well. So now you need to go ahead and get rid of this td tag and instead only get the inner portion or the inner value, which is in this case these various carbohydrate values. So in order to get that, you again go ahead and do dot inner HTML, and that should actually fix your problem. And now if you refresh, as you can see, you only now have these individual values and the tags are no longer present over there. So now once you have the carb values here, you can also go ahead and round up these values as well. So now I can go back over here, and let's now simply go ahead and sum up all of these values together. So right inside the for loop, in order to sum up all those values, I would say carbs plus equals. And now instead of actually just displaying these values in the console, I can now get access to these values over here. So I will simply go ahead, copy this portion and paste it up over here. So this will now go ahead and kind of save all of those values in here. However, if you do so, and now if you try to just log in the value of carbs, let's see what you would get. So if I would do console.log, and if I would pass in the value of carbs here, let's see what value we would get. So if I hit refresh, as you can see, you will get this garbage value here. And the reason for that is because only getting the value itself is not sufficient, but you also need to go ahead and convert this particular value into float. So in order to do that, we have a method in JavaScript which is called as parseFloat. So I will type in parseFloat here, and to this particular parseFloat, I will pass in the value which we get. So I will simply cut this, paste it right in there. And now once we are done with this, Let's now check the value for carbs. So now if I hit refresh, as you can see, we actually got the value of carbs over here, which is 195.8. So now once you do that, you now know that you have the value for carbs. Now, similar to this, you also need to get the value for the protein, for the fats and the calories as well. So getting their values is actually quite simple. So let's go ahead and do that. So I will now get the value of protein. So I will say protein plus equals, and all of this code is going to be exactly the same, but now instead of actually having the cell value of 1, as protein is present in cell number 2, I will simply do cell of 2 up over here. So now this will actually give me the value of protein. So let's actually check if the value is correct. So I will simply pass in the value of protein here, hit refresh, and as you can see, we have the value of protein, that is the total protein consumed. And you can also cross check these values. So 10 plus 10, 20, 30, and then we have 6 and 2, which is around 8. So the result comes out to be 39.6, which seems correct. So that means we are getting accurate values in here. And now let's do the same thing for fats as well. So I would say fats plus equals the same thing, but now instead of cell number 1, I will say cell number 3. And let's do the same thing for calories as well. So calories plus equals the same thing, but change the cell to 4. Okay, so now once you have all of these values, you can also confirm if they are correct by simply logging them into the console. So let's check for fats. And I guess that's actually accurate, and you can do the same check for calories as well, but I'm not going to do that. Okay, so now once you have these values in here, our next job is to go ahead and actually assign all of these values to the bottom of the table right here in the last row of your table. So currently the last row does not display anything at all. However, now we need to go ahead and have something at the bottom to display the total. So our job is to go ahead and add an additional set of row at the very bottom. So in order to do that, what I will do here is that I'll go ahead, and when the N4 ends, I will create another row over here, and within this row, just as we actually have these particular cells, I will go ahead and create another cells over here. So I will say TD, and here I will assign some ID to it. So the ID for now is going to be empty, and I'm going to go ahead and call this thing as, let's say, name. And let's say we say something like, so as this is going to display total, I will name the first row as total. So I will say total here, and if we go back, hit refresh, as you can see it says total. That means it's working well. So now for the rest of the cells here, let's actually assign some IDs over here so that we can get access to these elements. So now I will go ahead and in here again create the same thing which we have here. So I will simply copy that, paste it up over here, and I will give it an ID. Let's say as this cell has to display the total number of carbohydrates, I will say this is going to be total carbs, and I will keep this thing as empty. Then I will do the same thing for protein, fats and calories. So I will say total protein, total fats and total calories. Okay, so now once we have this, if you hit refresh, as you can see, you don't have any values yet. However, the values are actually present up over here in these variables. So now in order to assign those values to these particular IDs, what you need to do is that you again need to go ahead and write in some JavaScript. So here, first of all, you actually need to go ahead and get all of these particular cells over here. So let's get them one by one. So I will say document.get element by ID. Let's get the total carbs first. So I will say total carbs, and now I want to set its inner HTML to the actual carbs value, which is nothing but this value which we have here. So I will say this equals carbs. And let's do the same thing for other fields as well. So this is going to be total protein. This is going to be for fats, calories. This is going to be protein, fats, calories. Okay, so now once we are done with this, let's actually take a look if it works. So when I hit refresh, as you can see, we actually get an NaN value here. And the reason why we have these NaN values in here is because we now need to go ahead and end this particular loop one row behind. So I will do this -1, and that should actually fix our issue. So now if I hit refresh, as you can see, now it will display the total number of carbs, proteins, fats, and calories up over here. And one interesting thing about this is that if you now go ahead and let's say if I add oats, so as you can see, these are the current total statistics. However, if I add another cup of oats, these values actually have changed up over here. However, as you can see, we have added one value here, and that value actually broke up our entire table. That's because it added this long decimal value in here. So in order to get rid of this exact issue, there's one more thing which you need to do, and that thing is you actually need to round up all the values. So if you go back to your code, as you can see, once you get these values from here, we forgot to actually go ahead and round up all of these values. So now in order to round up these values, you can do something like carbs equals math.round. Let's do carbs. So this will round up the carb values and store it back into the carbs variable. And now let's do the same thing for protein and fats as well. So I will simply do protein equals math.round. That's going to be protein. Let's do the same thing for fats as well. So fats are going to be math.round fats. And you don't actually have to go ahead and do this for calories, but just for the sake of safety, let's do this as well. So calories equals math.round. That's actually going to be calories. Okay, so once we do that, let's head back and hit refresh. Or let's visit this page again, and as you can see, now we no longer have that particular issue over here, and now the values are actually rounded up. So now if I try to add brown bread over here at the bottom, these stats will change. So if I click on add, as you can see, these statistics actually changed. So that means we have successfully calculated the total up over here, and everything is working fine. However, now our next job is to go ahead and add a nice looking graph over here, which is going to be a dynamic graph which will display the macronutrient breakdown in our diet. So we are going to do that in the upcoming lecture. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you.